So let's start with a specific date, June 5th.
Right.
On June 5th, Iran fired 7 ballistic missiles at U.S. military assets. And I mean, not at empty water as some kind of warning shot. They fired directly at the Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait and the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, at American soldiers. And the kicker here is this all happened under an active ceasefire.
Well, technically speaking, the ceasefire is still in place. I mean, both sides are still actively talking through Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
Neither Washington nor Tehran has actually declared the ceasefire dead.
Which, leads to the obvious question you're probably asking yourself right now. If this is a ceasefire, what does a war actually look like?
Yeah, it's a completely fair question. It feels totally contradictory.
So that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive. We are exploring the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. This is the direct result of the active conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
And just to give you some context on where we're pulling this from, we've got a massive stack of intelligence assessments. We're looking at situational reports from the Institute for the Study of War right up to early June, fact sheets from the International Energy Agency, and some really detailed historical timelines from the Council on Foreign Relations.
Exactly. The mission of this deep dive is to unpack how a single 34-kilometer-wide waterway triggered the biggest energy shock since the 1970s. We're going to break down this bizarre reality of a double blockade and really try to figure out why this supposed truce looks so much like a hot war.
Because if you've been following the news and you're feeling totally confused about how diplomatic talks involve airstrikes, you are definitely not alone. It's a vast, highly fluid situation.
So let's walk through the full arc of this just to get everyone on the same page. The spark was February 28th, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury, which is this massive coordinated strike on Iran.
Right, and the critical outcome of that operation was the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, which is, a seismic event. It fundamentally altered the entire regional landscape.
Absolutely. So in immediate retaliation, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. And we really need to emphasize what that means for you, the listener, and your daily life. Normally, 25% of the world's seaborne oil flows through there.
Yeah, 20 million barrels a day, plus 20% of the global liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
Right. So when that shuts down, the inflation impact is instantaneous. It hits the price of literally everything. But Iran didn't just put up a metaphorical barricade, did they?
No, not at all. They physically restricted access using a pretty sophisticated mix of asymmetric warfare. We're talking explosive drone boats, swarms of IRGC speedboats, coastal missiles, naval mines.
And it got lethal immediately. Like March 1st, they strike the skylight, an oil tanker killing 2 Indian crew members. A few days later, a massive explosion hits the Senegal Namibe near Kuwait.
Which really showed the geographic reach of their coastal weapons. It wasn't just the narrowest part of the strait that was dangerous.
Right, but here is where my whole perspective on this shifted. At first, it sounds like pure chaos, right? Just missiles flying everywhere. But when you look at the maritime tracking data, it's actually this dark underlying logic. It's a selective blockade.
Yes. They essentially turned a global shipping lane into a partisan toll booth.
Explain how that actually worked on the water.
Well, Iran deliberately allowed ships from allied or friendly nations, like China and Russia, and later India and Pakistan, to pass through safely. But ships from Western nations, or anyone without prearranged political cover, were targeted. Or they were forced to pay these exorbitant tolls.
Like $150,000 tolls.
Yeah, up to $2 million in some reports.
That is just wild. It's basically weaponized commerce. And the economic contagion from this was so much weirder than just high gas prices. Brent crude oil spiked to like $126 a barrel, sure. But then there's the helium.
Oh, the helium shortage is a perfect example of how interconnected this all is. Because Qatar's massive LNG shipments were trapped in the Gulf, the world suddenly faced this severe helium deficit.
Wait, helium comes from natural gas.
Yeah, it's captured as a byproduct during Qatar's natural gas extraction. They're a massive global supplier. And we aren't talking about party balloons here. Helium is critical for cooling superconducting magnets in MRI machines. So suddenly, global hospitals are facing operational threats.
And semiconductor manufacturing, too. They had to start rationing it by April. And then there's the fertilizer angle, which I found totally alarming. 30% of the world's internationally traded fertilizer transits the strait.
Right, because the Gulf produces nearly half the world's urea, which needs natural gas as a feedstock. So when the gas is locked up, European and Asian fertilizer plants just shut down.
Which threatens the 2027 global food supply. It's this huge domino effect. But amidst all that, there's this really counterintuitive winner in the data. While Gulf nations like Iraq and the UAE were losing billions because their oil was trapped, the US and Russia actually made out incredibly well.
It's the irony of market substitution. The global demand for energy didn't just vanish. The U.S. actually saw revenues jump by about $50 billion, and Russia by over $15 billion simply because they filled the market gaps.
Yeah, Europe was basically forced to import record volumes of Russian Arctic LNG just to survive the squeeze, which completely undermines their post-Ukraine sanctions.
Geopolitical crises force terrible compromises.
Always. Okay, so moving to April. The U.S. decides it has to respond to this toll booth. On April 8th, Pakistan brokers this 2-week ceasefire, but the talks in Islamabad fail. And on April 13th, President Trump declares what's being called a double blockade.
Right. And this is where the logistics get deeply surreal.
Exactly. Iran is blockading the Gulf, so the U.S. Navy decides to blockade Iran. The U.S. announces they're intercepting ships that paid tolls to Iran, like the Durrani and the Tafani, and they launch Operation Project Freedom to forcefully escort merchant ships.
Which brings us to this incredibly tense period from April through June. Trump extended the ceasefire indefinitely, but the U.S. blockade continues. And then we hit June 5th through the 7th.
Right, back to June 5th, Iran launches consecutive days of drone attacks toward the strait. The U.S. shoots them down and then strikes Iranian radar sites on Qeshm Island and near Sirik. Iran calls that a ceasefire violation, and Pakistani mediators have to rush back to Tehran.
Which is the core of our debate today. You look at that timeline, you look at that timeline as a whole, and it's easy to assume the whole diplomatic effort is a sham.
Well, I'm going to argue it is a sham. The ceasefire was never real. To me, looking at the history here, it was clearly just a pause for Iran to rearm, reposition, and figure out their targeting after epic fury.
I see it differently. A ceasefire that both sides keep violating, but neither formally abandons, is still functioning as a pressure release valve. And honestly, that is exactly what ceasefires are supposed to do in highly volatile, asymmetric conflicts.
But history says this exact pattern ends badly. This is the classic war of attrition pattern. Look at 1969 to 1970, the war of attrition between Israel and Egypt along the Suez Canal.
Okay, that's an interesting parallel.
It's the exact same dynamic. Neither side formally declared war. Both sides kept escalating within this notional ceasefire framework, and it nearly triggered a direct superpower confrontation. The Strait of Hormuz is the new Suez Canal. Let me just finish this thought. Each drone launch, each U.S. counterstrike, each radar site destroyed. Every single radar site taken out is just one rung up the ladder. The problem with wars of attrition is that neither side intends to start the bigger war. They slide into it.
I hear that, but there's a structural counterargument here. The one massive thing that makes this different from the Suez Canal is the nuclear variable.
Okay, how so?
On June 5th, the exact same day, Iran launched its massive drone wave. The IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, signaled that a nuclear framework agreement might actually be within reach.
That timing is pretty suspicious.
No, it's leverage. Iran isn't launching drones because it wants a wider war that would destroy its domestic infrastructure. It's launching drones because it needs leverage at the negotiating table. The strikes, the toll booth, they were a bargaining position, not a battle plan for conquest.
See, that logic completely assumes rational actors with full information and full control of their forces.
You don't think they're in control?
I think the IRGC targeting U.S. military installations in Kuwait and Bahrain, not just shipping lanes, but actual bases, suggests Tehran's internal factions might not all be reading from the same script. This isn't just diplomatic signaling.
So you think the ceasefire is completely structurally flawed?
I think the ceasefire has absolutely no architecture. There's no verification mechanism. There is no neutral monitor on the water. There isn't even an agreed definition of what constitutes a violation.
Well, yeah, the U.S. and Iran have totally contradictory accounts of who violated it first on June 5th.
Right. The U.S. is intercepting toll-paying ships is enforcing international law. Iran calls it piracy. Without a shared structure, a ceasefire is literally just a slower war.
But it's managed.
Is it? The IRGC explicitly confirmed they targeted U.S. military assets. That is an act of war under any legal definition. If a Pakistani-mediated framework can't even produce a joint statement on what the terms are, it cannot produce peace.
I get the pessimism. I really do.
Yeah.
What you're describing is dangerous. But it is managed danger.
Yeah.
And that is fundamentally different from unmanaged escalation.
Tell that to Kuwait and Bahrain.
Look, the U.S. has redirected massive naval assets to the region specifically to cap that escalation. They're intercepting the missiles. It's high-wire diplomacy, yes, but neither side has crossed the ultimate red line.
Every week this drags on. Those Gulf states, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, are absorbing Iranian missile fire in their airspace. Their patience has a limit. The moment one of those Gulf states officially enters the conflict or someone gets hit on the ground, the map changes completely.
I'm not denying the risk. But if you look at Iran's actions, refusing substantive nuclear negotiations until a full truce in Lebanon is achieved, using the Strait as their ultimate leverage, it shows calculation. They know exactly how far they can push the U.S. without triggering a regime-ending response.
I just think managed danger is a very comforting academic term for a situation where ballistic missiles are flying at American troops.
Fair enough. It's a terrifying reality on the ground.
It really is.
Right.
So just to summarize the sheer scale of this crisis for everyone listening, a 34-kilometer stretch of water has essentially entangled the world's superpowers. It's reshaped global shipping routes, spiked the cost of living, and created this bizarre military standoff where a ceasefire includes daily airstrikes.
It really highlights the extreme vulnerability of our global infrastructure. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own, something that goes beyond the daily military posturing.
Yeah, let's hear it.
If this double blockade and this constant threat of violence in the Strait of Hormuz becomes the permanent new normal, what does that do to the global energy calculus?
It changes the math completely.
Exactly. When the true cost of fossil fuels suddenly includes the very real risk of global conflict, supply chain collapses, and severed shipping lanes. Could this geopolitical terror force the globe to accelerate the transition to alternative, localized energies faster than any environmental policy ever could?
Wow, that is a really provocative way to look at it. National security driving the green transition.
Right. Not because of climate change, but purely for geopolitical survival.
That's definitely something to think about. Well, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for those underlying mechanisms of leverage, and remember, the world's most important toll booth is still heavily armed, and the price of passage is only getting higher.